and being a dog handler was. After I went through basic, I went to advanced imagery training. After I went to advanced imagery training, I got sent to NCO school. They selected about 6 people out of every class of advanced infantry. You had 5 platoons going through it, and they selected about 4 or 5 people to go to the NCO Academy down at Fort Benning, Georgia. Of course, you were rated on that. You had to have leadership. You had to have this and that. Score so high on your points. You had to be an expert in with 16 out of 14, and you had to have a certain. Your conduct had to be a certain way to go. So they sent us to NCO Academy. Well, I got down there, and we had a 0 week. That's a week that don't count on nothing. You're just there for a week. And I didn't want to go to NCO Academy. Really, I had so much of that stuff. I really didn't want to go to it anymore. And one day we were up there waiting. We had a week. We had to wait, and I saw these guys down there. There was about 3 of them, and had one German Shepherd down there. And it was after hours, and I went down there and talked to them. I said, "What are y'all doing?" They said, "We're dog handlers. We're in dog school. We're training to be dog handlers for the Army." I said, "Well, how did you get into this?" They said, "Well," I said, "I've never heard tell of it." They said, "You're not told about it. Nobody knows about it. You had to volunteer for it, and it's only open to people that's been accepted in NCO Academy or the people in OCS, which is Officers Candidate School. We had a lot of people in OCS that came in the Scout Dog School. But the way it worked, it was a course of 12 weeks. Now, 2 weeks was basic obedience, training your dog and all the basic obedience, which is heel, sit, nose, stay, come, the whole thing. You had to teach him that. Then you started training the dog in scouting. And what you would do was, you would take the dog out, you'd work him in the mornings in his basic obedience, and you'd start scouting. You'd put decoys out, you'd put people out. They'd put people out, the trainers would, out in the woods, wherever they may be, and you would have to take that dog and scout and find them. You had to read your dog. Your dog alerted by scent, a sound, and a sight is how he alerted. Now, how did the dog alert? Let's see if I can get some Heiko to alert. Come, Heiko. He's just, come. There's an alert. Come. There's an alert. Now, that's how it was. The dog would smell, and his ears would go up, and his head would go up, and he would zero in on, like, see? That's an alert right there. Come, Heiko. Heiko, sit. Then turn around, sit, Lux. And that's how the alert worked. That's what you read on your dog. And you had to be able to pick up and tell them where the decoy was or where the person was. Okay, then you got the tripwires. You had a lot of tripwires in Vietnam. What did you do to the dog? Well, you would have trails set up with tripwires on them. And you had to know where they were in order to train your dog to begin with. And you would take your dog up there and you would just snap him back and sit. And he would pick up the noise off of that tripwire. The wind coming off that tripwire, he would hear the whistling noise and he would sit. You could teach him to do that, and he would do that. And on plungy pits, dogs are naturally sure-footed animals. So the plungy pits and holes wasn't as bad as other things because you could correct them once or twice and they would veer away from it. They wouldn't walk off in that hole. They had enough sense not to. They really did. And that's how you train them on that. But you spent most of your time with scouting. And the way it worked, it was just 10 weeks, but it was not 10 weeks like anything else. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But day and night, you had the dog. You didn't get, you was him, you had to feed him. He was with you out in the woods at night. You stayed out in the woods for 10 weeks, training the dog. And you would do different exercises, of course, with your dog all the time. You had to learn, and if you didn't do what you were supposed to, you got the fun of picking him up and walking about 100 yards with him. And he's just 7 weeks old. A big one.
7 months old.
7 months old. A big one, it got kind of heavy. The dogs used German Shepherds then for scout dogs and sentry dogs. There was no Belgian Malinois around them, and they just used German Shepherds. And they had to be at least a year old. It had to be at least 70 pounds and had to be 75% German Shepherds in order to start training. We didn't really get the dogs. Today is different. Today they have the best breeders in the world in Germany, and they go once a year and they meet the breeders in Germany. And and the Army purchases puppies to come back, and they bring them here, and they let them stay with the family. They tried just taking the dogs and putting them in a kennel when they were 7 weeks old, but that didn't work. Now the family has to adopt them and raise them for 7 months, and then they put them into training. But that's mainly the breeds they use now. But why did we get them? They advertised that the military wanted dogs. If you would give your dog up, they'd pay $1 for your dog, and he would go be a war dog. So that's where we got them. They were pets, people's pets, came to us, and we trained them for military working dogs. That's exactly what they were, and that's what we done with them. And people say, well, didn't they get mean? They were trained to bite and do all that, but no, it's when they're not doing it, it's not that way. They're not mean, they're just like he is. They, it's like a game worked into them, a job they've got to do. But I went through dog school, and then I got sent to Vietnam. I got orders that I'd be in the 101st Airborne Division with the 42nd Infantry Platoon Scout Dogs, the 1st Brigade of the 101st, and we'd be supporting the 1st of the 327, the 2nd of the 327, the 1st of the 501st, the 2nd of the 501st, and the 2nd of the 503rd Infantry, and the 2nd of the 17th Cal of the 101st Airborne Division. Yet, the 101st Airborne Division had a cavalry unit. It was the 2nd of the 17th Cavalry. It was an air mobile cavalry. It wasn't one that rode horses. But that's who we supported. And the way that worked was, when you flew over there, you went to Long Bend, you went down to Benmar, to the dog kennels, you worked your dog for a few days, and you headed on up north. That's where I went. I went up north to Ashaw Valley, where my base camp was in a place called Phu Bai, which is right outside that, not far from the Ashaw Valley. That was Camp Eagle was the name of it. Now to begin with, the 1st Cal was there, and who came after the 1st Cal? Maybe some Marines was there. Then the 101st. 101st was called the Nomads of Vietnam, because they went from the Delta all the way as far up as you could go. They had to, they went place to place to place. They were there for several years. In fact, they didn't come home to 73, I think it was. It was one of the last units to come out. But that's where I was trained at, and we were in the Ashaw Valley. That's what part of Vietnam we had. That was our AO of operation, which is Northern I Corps, which runs in the Laos. Touched a little bit of Cambodia, and there's no record of the troops being in Laos. There's a little bit of Cambodia, but believe me, we were in Laos about it. Because the highway that came out of North Vietnam, out of Hanoi, bringing the supplies down, run into Laos. So we were in Laos about as much as we was in South Vietnam. But what we would do with the dogs, you would get you an assignment, you'd get a mission to go on. Whether you'd get on a bird and you'd go out there. You'd land the bird. It may land at a fire base. It was a log bird usually.
And the bird's a helicopter.
Yeah.
A type of-
They were Hueys. We were flying on Hueys. What we flew out there on most of the time was Hueys. And it was usually a log bird, and you got on the log bird was a supply bird, and they throw it off at the fire base. You get on another bird and go out to the LZ, wherever you were going to. LZ is a landing zone. And while they made them during the jungle, we just blow the side of a hill off. All the trees off of it, they would blow it off with dynamite, and that's where you'd sit down on the helicopter, and you'd sit down fairly close to the ground, good enough to where you'd get off, and your dog, it didn't bother him if you had to jump out of it or not. He loved it anyhow. But that's where you'd go on your mission. And then you'd meet with the lieutenant, the platoon leader. Usually you went in a platoon, and you'd meet with the platoon leader, and he'd tell you where you were going, how far you was going, which way you want to go. Well, what we would do then, we'd run x-rays. And the x-ray was where I would take 7 or 8 men, 9 men, and I would lead them on x-rays. We'd make over, say, I want you to go 300 yards this way, cut over 200 yards, come back 300 yards, and make sure that area is clear because we're going to move out. So I would walk point. That's what we did in Scout Dog School. We walked point. We led the troops through the jungle. They followed us. And you would run your x-ray, you'd come back, and they'd decide which way they were going to go, so you would just lead the platoon. You'd turn, and over there in Vietnam, where I was at, in the jungle, you had to turn the dog loose. There was no keeping it on a leash because you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. And there's no way you could go up and down those mountains holding a dog or trying, you just let him go. He would run the trails, he knew what to do, and if he alerted, if he smelled something, he would alert and let you know it was there. They picked up on personnel, they picked up on bunker complexes, they picked up on all kind of booby traps, tripwires and everything else, picked up on snipers. It was amazing what they could do. And some people wondered how far they could do that. Well, when we were down at Fort Benning in training, one day we were gonna find out. And the NCOs said, we're gonna see how far a dog can pick up. Well, there was a railroad track down there that run through right at the edge of Fort Benning, right over to Alabama. So we went down to the railroad track, I took my dog down there when I was training, and they had already sent a decoy out that way. And they told me which way to go. Well, I went down there, and she hit that railroad track, and she alerted wide open, straight up that track. And I called where he was, exactly where he was. Because she'd always tell you, if you looked up between her ears, she would always zero it in with wherever the decoy was. And they measured it off. It was 700 meters that dog picked up that decoy. The wind was coming down the railroad track, and she was able to pick up the scent cone for 700 yards.
Charlie, I think she may have a question. Did you have a question, sweetie?
Yeah.
Okay, you can ask it.
How did that nominated war last?
What'd you say?
How long did the
Vietnam War last.
Altogether, they dated it back now, I think back in about the late 50s.
Late 50s to 72, 73.
I was over there in 69, 70. But you would turn your dog loose and you would scout with it. Now there was 4,000 dogs in Vietnam. There's 2,000 handlers. That's hard to believe, ain't it? And there's also combat trackers. We have 5 combat tracker teams attached to our scout dog team. Nobody knows what a combat tracker is. You never heard tell of it. Well, nobody knew about it. Well, I didn't know about it. But the Army selected so many guys, and then they couldn't even tell their mamas, they couldn't even tell their wives, they couldn't tell nobody. They put them on planes and took them to New Zealand. In New Zealand, they met the British. And the British had Labrador retrievers that were trained on blood trails. And it was a 5-man team. You had a dog handler, you had a squad leader, you had a rifleman, you had a visual tracker, and you had a guy walking the rear. There was 5 of them on the team. And what the combat trackers done was, like, if you got in a firefight and some of them got away, wounded and crawled through the jungle or something, the combat trackers would come out there and them labs would follow the blood trail up to so close to them, and then they would alert and stop, and you could find the wounded NVA soldiers wherever they were holding up there. That's what the lab's done. Very few people know about that or have ever heard tell of it. You can look it up. It's combat trackers, Vietnam combat trackers. They really. But the dogs were magnificent. They really was. The dog, you'd have to go up the mountain with him. He'd go up the mountain. He was really good at it. And they'd go up the mountain, and they would search the whole time they was going up the mountain. And a lot of times they would push the dog, which was something that you were not supposed to ever push your dog. If you felt your dog was being pushed, you were supposedly able to call off and take your dog off point. Well, that didn't work. I mean, you was one guy out there, and you may have 40 to 80 people following you that's all together, and you're a single individual unit out there by yourself, you and the dog. I mean, ain't no way they're gonna listen to you. Believe me, you're gonna have to go on. But one night we were moving out, and they wanted to set up on the top of a ridge before it got dark. Well, y'all never been in the jungle over there, but how it is, once it starts getting a little dark, in just a few minutes, it gets so black up there that you can't even see your feet in front of you. It really gets dark, and it gets dark fast because you can't see the sun. The triple canopies over the top of it, you cannot see the sun. You might see a little spot here or there and yonder, but unless you're on a trail, you're never gonna see the sun that's opened up. But they were pushing me and my dog, come on, let's go. And I'd look at him and I'd say, come on, Danny, let's go. They wanna get up here. And he would start slowing down. Then all of a sudden he started stopping. And he's sitting, and I had enough sense. I knew what he was doing. Why I didn't stop, I don't know. I'd go over and I'd push him on. I said, come on, Danny, let's go. He wouldn't go. I took hold of the harness, I shoved him up, and he sat down as soon as I did. I said, well, I'll go on by you then. But when I walked up there and went to go by him, all of a sudden something grabbed my arm, and I felt this pain running through my arm. It's like in a vice, and I looked down there, and he had his mouth over my arm, and you could feel the pressure of his molars gliding into me. And I looked into them cold, dark, black eyes, and I knew then that something was wrong. And about 3 foot in front of me was a wire running across the trail, and it was booby trapped to a 40mm rocket. And it would really been bad if I went on up there. Danny was credited with saving the whole squad that evening. From then on, they really respected him and me when we came out there. Well, later on, the Texas Star was really getting going at a very, very strong pace. Texas Star was the last big push that the NVA, 29th Regiment of the NVA, come out of Hanoi to put on the 101st. And the jungle was really full of them. And they were trained troops. They wasn't these people you see on TV wearing pajamas and nothing like that. Believe me, they were hardcore NVA, trained by the best of the best out of Russia and out of China. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but Russia had people over there supporting the North Vietnam Army. They really did. But no, because I've seen them out there. But the Vietnamese, the North Vietnam, they saw what these dogs were doing, how good they was, the casualties they were preventing. So they got some of their little dogs, and they were going to make scout dogs out of them. Well, I tell you what, the best thing in the world ever happened. Because the German Shepherd would pick one of them things up a mile away. I could give it, they'd pick them up, they'd pick the scent up on that dog a mile away. But one day I was out there in the Asher walking park, and there was, I don't know if y'all ever seen the Russian Shepherds that they use, the way they cross the German Shepherds up. Well, they had the Russian Shepherds out there for a short period of time. I think the diseases and all that, they didn't train them, but they died out. But they would walk them. And people said, well, are you sure Russia was out there and North Vietnam was involved with it? I know there was. I remember one day, I was in the Ashaw, and I heard something coming, screaming. And it was a MiG-21, close to the ground as he could get going through the Ashaw. He was flying. And I said, wonder what's wrong with that thing? Well, all of a sudden, there was 2 F-4 Phantoms right on his tail coming up through there. He went over the top of a mountain. When he did, boom, you heard the F-4s and just seen a blaze of glory. They turned and you just seen him heading on back. He was going to Saigon, and they went on back to Long Binh, the F-4s did. But they were over there, and me and Danny was out there, had to go to Hill 714, and it's online if you want to look at it. And, it took us 4 days to get up, but we finally got to the top. Well, this time, it was not a platoon, it was a company of troops with a recon platoon. And I was walking point for recon, and all the other ones was following us getting up the hill. Well, we set up for about 30, 40 minutes, and they needed bullets, they needed to get more ammunition and get resupplied. Then we're going to move out again. So they told me to move out, and at the last bunker complex that was on that hill when we started down it, Danny went out there, and when he did, he stopped and he twisted that head. I called the alert, but they knew it was over for them. They knew it was done. They knew they were done. So they decided to blow him half in two with a grenade launcher. And that's where Danny lost his life. That was April the 29th, 1969. That's when he lost his
70.
life.
1970.
1970. That's when he lost his life saving people. Well, I got another dog, and his name was Thor. He came from the 1st Division. They were pulling the 1st Division out. Well, they didn't pull them out. They just told people that. They sent the colors on them. The 1st Division came to the 101st. Part of them was assigned to us. The dog handlers down there was assigned to us. So they came up there and they brought their dogs. Well, I got one of their dogs that they had down there in the lowlands. He was a good dog. Thor was his name. And me and him, I trained him, worked with him, and we started going out on mission. Well, he was really good. He done the same thing Danny did. He could alert. He could do everything he could do. He really could. And it was in June the 4th, 1970, we were on Hill 882. And Hill 882 was pretty doggone bad. You can look it up. The second of the 327 was there, the second of the 501st, the first of the 501st, and it was a lot of casualties. North Vietnam War had a lot of casualties there. And, we went there, and I was with the 1st of the 502nd. And me and Thor had been there, and they set up one night in a hurry, and they set up and they didn't put out no security whatsoever. It was just me and him with security for the platoon that night. And you could smell rice cooking. So I knew it wasn't a good day, gonna be a good day. I mean, I could tell it was gonna be a good day. And the next morning when we moved out, they wanted to move down the ridge. So they told me where to go, and I said, okay, well, they had a Kit Carson Scout walking my slack. And a Kit Carson Scout is a North Vietnamese regular army that they captured. And I was talking to him, he'd go on and say, well, why'd they capture you? He said, well, I went on a water run without my gun and I surrendered. I said, okay, I understand. I said, but you're still a North Vietnamese soldier. I said, if we get into something, are you gonna shoot me in the back? What are you gonna do? No. He said, they'll be after me. Well, they had a reward on scout dog handlers of 20,000. They had a reward on the dog of 10,000. The North Vietnamese Army did. Of course, Russia and China was paying. Well, they also put a bounty on the Kit Carson Scouts. And the way you had to collect off of the dog was they had to kill the dog and be able to get his ear cut off, because his ear had a tattoo in it. He had his service number tattooed in his ear. And on the scout dog handler, they had to be able to get the scout dog tab off of his shoulder, and they could turn that in and they could get their money that way. Well, me and Thor went down that hill. He went down there a little bit, and there was an outcrop up, which you don't see in Vietnam very often. And it was about 6 or 7 boulders up. Well, Thor went there, and when he did, he jumped over there and just alerted right straight on that outcrop, just right over there. Well, I called the alert. By that time, they let him go. They shot him. He was gone. And the Kit Carson Scout, I looked around, he was gone. He was the other way. But that's where Thor, that's what happened to Thor. Then I got another dog. My last dog that I had over there, his name was Lux. He was a working line German Shepherd, just like the other ones, but he was had the DDR blood in him. He was a big bone kind of dog, had a big square head. No, he was really a good dog. Me and him started going out there, and I had him the rest of my tour. And we would be out there, and he was really an amazing dog, he was. They all was, but he was. And one time we were on the other side of Hill 882, and they were working it, or we were going down, there was a road, there was a trail going down that thing, wide as them 2 doors there. And you could tell people been using it. It was heavily used by the NBA soldiers. Well, I was going down through there, and I started seeing communication wire on the floor, on the jungle of the floor where there wasn't no leaves and nothing. And I said, well, this can't be good. And it looked just like what we used. Maybe ours came from Japan or China or somewhere. They all probably used the same thing. And we kept looking at that, and they had been pounding the place with F4s. They'd been pounding with them all for weeks and weeks. They'd been pounding this area with F4s coming out, drop payload after payload. And we came down there, and there was bunkers down there, big enough, as big as this room, one of them was, that you could go in and walk around, you know. Well, we got to them, and I had a black guy walking my slack. And I'll never forget him. I talked to him 2 or 3 days, and he was really, he didn't have one more day to walk slack. And he was scared. I mean, he was scared. He scared me to be behind me. I didn't know what he would do. And he had lost all his color. He was kind of a gray color. He was really, scared. He was shaking like a leaf on the tree. And we saw that come to that bunker complex. My dog was there. He said, what we gonna do? What we gonna do? We gonna search it? I said, nope, he is. And so I sent him in there. He went in there. Waited, he come back out. I said, well, that's looking better all the time. I sent him in there again. A few minutes, he came back out. So we called the CO up there and told him what I had. He seen it. He said, what do you think's in there? There ain't nothing. I said, he's jumping in there. I know they did that. So they had light. Of course, they had face lights. They cut on the lights and went in there. And it was amazing how it was. It had a big communication table, bigger than this one, sitting there with all their stuff on it. It had tons and tons of records in there. So it took about, I don't know, we were there for 3 or 4 days getting all that together. And it actually had records in there of scout dogs being killed, and the NBA soldier that killed them that was trying to collect the award. They had all that in there. They had how many American soldiers they had killed, how many they had wounded. They had all that in there. How many days the NBA had been there, where they were going to be going the next time. They was glad to get all that information. They run and left is what happened. because they knew their days were done. And, that's what that dog done. That's the only thing he done. Now, me and him was out in the same, not far from the same area, Walking Point. And the Army had something they called a hunter killer teams. And what that was, you've ever seen these little Loach helicopters? They're like they just buzz around the jungle, buzz around, you see them, they're little, they can just buzz around like a mosquito. That's what they look like, a flying mosquito is what they call it. Well, they would be out there flying right over the top of the trees and up and down the trails for one reason. They wanted to draw a fire from the NVA. Well, you know why they wanted to draw a fire? Because their big brother was right down in that alley, the Cobra was. And he would just rise up there, and it was all over with for him. But me and that dog was on the trail, and he had done gone up the mountain and made a little turn to the right. And I came walking up through there, and there was that Loach. Well, it's that Loach saw me and it took off. Well, I didn't think nothing about it. Well, the dog come back to me and walked around, and when that dog got me, he turned around and started to go, there it was, looking right at me, it was a Cobra. He ain't but 3 foot wide. Seen them big rocket pods on him, and I seen everything, and I said, oh no. Oh no. And he saw the dog. The pilot saw the dog of the helicopter, and that's how he knew it was an American soldier. Because I just stopped, he just come up a little bit closer, and he was so close, I could see him. He just throwed up his hand and moved that thing over to the side. It's kind of turned sideways on everything, going boom, 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 as he flew on out. But if I hadn't done with that dog, I wouldn't be here today. Well, me and him came out of Laos. Me and Lux came out of Laos. Was going down into the Ashall Valley out of Laos. And it was the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. It was just a big, green, lush valley on that side, coming out of the mountain. So that wasn't good at all. So I'd send him on down there, so he could scout it out before we went down there. Well, I got down there and you could hear water running. So I knew there was a creek down there. I knew that wouldn't be good. You couldn't cross a creek with your dog. I mean, you were a setting duck if that happened. That's a real dangerous area. So I sent him on down there and told him to go on across. Well, I heard him get the water. I seen him come up on the other side and shake off. I said, well, he's looking good. And I sent him on. He went to, he's out of sight. I couldn't see him. So I just stood there and waited. Waited a few minutes, he'd come back down that mountain, running wide open, come across the creek, come over there. So we were able to cross that creek because that dog, he cleared the way for us to let us know that there was nothing there. And what did the creek look like? It was about as wide as from here to here. And it was started off about ankle deep, and then it got almost waist deep. And you was walking across it, and it was so clear, you could see fish down there swimming around your jungle boots. You could look down there and see your whole jungle boot. Believe that, not no mud around it or nothing. And fish would be swimming, you'd see fish swimming around in it. That's how clean it was. It really was amazing. But to see the Ashall Valley is something really, really something to see. It's a beautiful place. It wasn't too nice then. It was kind of a little bit on the hostile side. But, due to the dogs, we were able to make it through that. And the dogs also they were trained to pick up weapons, caches. They were trained on ordnance. We trained them to smell powder and alert on powder, or to smell the metal that guns are made out of. In fact, right there is a picture of the largest NVA mortar tube that I took away from the NVA soldiers with a dog. He alerted on it, and they got that NVA mortar tube. I forgot about that. That's how it worked in dog school. And a lot of people don't know about it, but they did a wonderful, wonderful job. And this is military working dogs. This is the month that they honor them. They made to honor them. There's also something else that they've made a month for, and a lot of people don't know about it. It's the women that served in Vietnam. They've got a month that they're honoring for them now. And today, women are flying F-15 Raptors. They're flying the 16s. They're flying everything. There's women pilots just like there are men pilots, and they're good. And over there, they had something that was called Combat Nurses. They brought a book out, and they're bringing a series out on it. And if none of y'all have heard about them, you need to look and read the book, what they done. They were women that came over there. There were nurses and doctors, but the women were combat nurses, and they were out there in fire bases. They were out there in the jungle at times when they had to be. And these women were remarkable, I'm gonna tell you that. Some of them have got their stories that they give
what they seen, they never thought they would be. One of them, I think, said she never thought that she would ever go through what she went. But she talks about, as soon as she got there, she got to the fire place and they were in a makeshift hospital there.